feel as if I have a rather unique and personal perspective when it comes to mid-decade redistricting, and that's why I'm here. And I know there's a lot of formality when people come before panels such as this, but I'd like to, it's late, most of us been here a long time, and I'd like to cut through some of that formality and just say, this is so stupid. With all of the problems and all of the challenges that we face here in the state of Texas, here we are spending so much time and so much money on something that no one in the state of Texas asked for. I've lived through mid-decade redistricting, and back in the day in 2003 and 2004, the media used to call those of us who were targeted and taken out the victims of mid-decade redistricting. But I assure you, we were not alone, because the real victims in that process were the people of Texas, who got drawn into unintelligible districts because of the bizarre nature of the lines, and lost a mountain of leadership in the House of Representatives. The U.S. House of Representatives works, especially on the Democratic side, on the basis of seniority. The way you rise to power and the way you rise to leadership in the U.S. House is by serving a longer time. That's how you get into those positions. And when they did what they did back in 2003, we lost 5 key leadership posts in the House of Representatives. 5. 4 of them would have been chairman later in the day. And it's a level of leadership that we have never risen to again since that time in the U.S. House. People also warned that it would destroy the decorum here in the state legislature that had existed up into that time, the bipartisan approach that representatives used to take toward problems and situations.
Please complete your testimony.
Excuse me.
Oh, if you could just please complete your testimony. I'll give you another sentence. You got it. If you could please complete your testimony, just because time has expired. If you could just,
okay,
another sentence, I'll let you go.
Well, let me just say this, because people have testified earlier about their love for the Constitution and the brilliance of the forefathers. And I'd like to ask all of you to perform a very simple exercise. If you use ChatGPT, pull out your phone and ask, what did the founding fathers envision and not envision when it came to redistricting? And what they did not envision was partisan gerrymandering, of course, technology to micro-target and pack districts. And they certainly did not envision the cracking and packing of districts for partisan gain. So instead of relying on the guidance of Donald Trump, who none of you swore an oath to, but you did swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, look at what the forefathers envisioned. And then, if the list of what they didn't envision sounds familiar, it should, because that's exactly what you're doing. And I hope my Democratic friends will do everything you possibly can to stop it, and we will be there to support you. And thanks for allowing me to testify here today.
Any questions from members of this panel? Chair recognizes Vice Chair Rosenthal to question the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bell, for coming and bringing that. I think it's a really important perspective that you bring. And so, especially since you were part of that whole process that went down in 2003, I feel like it would be important to hear your perspective on how that fractured relationships and the process that we use in this building in Texas State Legislature, but also in Washington. So this gerrymandering, redistricting.
Well, what I was trying to say, Representative Rosenthal, was that at the time that it was being taken on, the lieutenant governor at the time was David Dewhurst, and Republican, and he compared engaging in redistricting to getting the flu. So you would think if that's the level of pleasantness that you would try to avoid going through that, not welcome. And everybody warned, and Representative Thompson remembers this, and probably some others on the panel, that if it did go forward, that it would shatter a lot of relationships in both the state house and the Senate. And as we've watched over the course of the last 22 years, it has become far more partisan here in the state legislature, and everybody used the U.S. House as the example that they wanted to try to avoid because it had already become extraordinarily partisan. And as long as the process remains in the hands of elected officials, it's going to be ugly, even if you just do it every 10 years. The folks in California said the representatives from California used to say they had a saying to one another that I'm for you during this redistricting process, right after me. And I think that's the way most people tend to look at it. And it becomes a very selfish process and a very partisan process, unless you do take steps to try to take some of that partisanship out of it.
Absolutely. And the only other thing that I want you to point out for us is what eventually happened with those maps and that process that was engaged in 2003. Can you tell us how that story ended?
I forget how many were turned or changed by the courts going forward. It was caught up in litigation for quite some time. And the strategy back then was a little bit different. Three of those representatives, Democratic representatives from Texas, represented strongly Republican-leaning districts. And they continued to vote for those representatives because they knew them. And there were folks like Charlie Stenholm who were doing a great job, Chet Edwards, and folks like that. And so they continued to get support, bipartisan support, in their districts. And so the goal then was to redraw the districts and move those folks into districts where the voters would not know them. And that's what they did. And in most cases, it succeeded.
So the way that it played out legally from the 2003 mid-cycle redistricting in the courts was some of those districts were struck down by the United States Supreme Court. Texas was ordered to draw new districts, which in part are some of those districts that we're about that these maps dismantle because now they can.
Well, this kind of strategy would not have even been discussed back then. So it's a whole new day, but it will have just as many ill effects as it did back then.
Maybe more.
Could be.
Thanks for your testimony,
Thanks.
sir.
Chair recognizes Dean Thompson to question the panel.
Chris, what district that you, according to the new map that we have learned, what district you end up in?
Well, that gets that gets a little confusing because I was elected from the 25th congressional district, and if you look at Wikipedia now, it looks like I either succeeded or preceded Lloyd Doggett, because Lloyd Doggett represented the 9th district, and then so that was another part of the strategy. If you change the numbers on the district, they didn't want anybody to be able to say that they had represented that district before. So it was the 25th, and then they broke up that district completely and made it primarily went into a Republican district for a while, but now that has changed, and Lizzie Fletcher represents that part of the district. And then the other part that I represented became part of the 9th congressional district.
And on the new map we have now, where would you fall? Are you still going to be in 7, or would you be?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter because I'm not going back. but I'm not exactly sure where that district or where this new map would place it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Manuel to question the panel.
Thank you. Mr. Bell, my story is interesting, but I'm asked this question. Can you remind people of what happened to the congressman who did mid-decade redistricting? What happened to Mr. Tom DeLay?
Well, some power was lost on both sides
Mhm.
because the Democrats lost potentially 5 chairmanships down the road, but the Republican side lost their majority leader of the Congress because of the very unethical way in which
He went to
the
jail.
whole process had been engineered.
He went to jail. You can be nice on that. He went to jail. And it's personal for me because one of those representatives was mine, Congressman Nick Lamson.
Right.
And they tore apart my coalition district. And it wasn't a coalition of just minority. It was really just a coalition district based upon interests, refinery, blue collar workers. And then we switched it to go further down towards Brazoria County, which we have nothing in common with when it comes to economic impact. Can you just, and I know I always ask this because people don't really care about this part of Southeast Texas. They just don't. Can you remind people what happens to smaller communities that are coalition districts? Because we always think of coalition districts as cities, where it's like, oh, they'll be fine somehow, some way, there's resources. Can you remind people of what happens to those communities when they lose those services, constituent healthcare services, where certain parts of the district, it doesn't matter because you're not going to vote for the person and you're never going to be able to beat them?
Right. So they become inconsequential to whoever's running because they don't feel like they need to pay attention. And from what happened to Congressman Lamson's district, not only did we lose his chairmanship in the subcommittee on space, on the science committee, but in that whole area, the way it was fractured and drawing basically what's called, I guess, the orange triangle. And if you go to Port Arthur back then, after not only the congressional redistricting, but also the state redistricting, their power had been so wiped away that they couldn't even have more than one post office or something.
I am so glad that you said that, because earlier we were talking about lack of constituent services. And I don't think people sometimes understand a lack of representation for an area can end up being the death knell. You've been to Port Arthur when it was at a place where it could have been stable, and Carl Parker, and we had Jack Brooks and all those people there. I've known in my life, my aunt worked for Congressman Lamson, was fired because of Tom DeLay. So this is personal. Can you talk about the fact of, and I know you've seen Port Arthur, it's not on the list of best cities in the world to live. It's one of the poorest, the top 20 poorest cities in the country to live in. Can you just talk to people about what happens to small rural communities what happened to Port Arthur that you've seen from where it was in the 90s to where it is now?
Well, when you hardly even know who your representative is because of the geography of the district, then it's pretty hard then to know who to reach out to for constituent services. When it's somewhat drawn based on the geography of the area and you're trying to keep communities of interest together, it's not really a problem to find your representative. But to pretend that this doesn't have any real impact on real people is absolutely ridiculous. And I do have to share a somewhat humorous story. The other day I was on Facebook and I got a friend suggestion that someone I might want to add, and that was Tom DeLay. and I suggested that the Facebook algorithm might have been a little off that particular day.
Well, we don't know how AI is truly working these days, but ain't that funny? Thank you so much for talking about that, because I really hope people with rural districts understand they are going to be affecting their constituents, not just the inner city that they want to get rid of, a blue place, because what most people who don't truly understand is we have people who are dying trying to get to a hospital to give birth. And this is not about an abortion thing. This is just women we have no hospital in Orange, Texas. And they're trying to get to Beaumont, or they're trying to get to a different part, and they have no way. So they bleed out and they die. And that's because we don't have enough infrastructure and we don't have enough money going into these areas. And these are not just Black women, they're white women, they're Hispanic women, biracial women. And some people think it's just, well, everybody doesn't need this, or my constituents are fine. Everyone's constituents are not fine. And last I knew, East Texas was not majority Black. So thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions for the members of this panel? Chair hears none. Thank you for your testimony. The panel is excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.